Glory America, bonjour, hi Canada, Hugh Hewitt live, back inside the Beltway, jet lagged and ready to talk. I went to bed at like 6 p.m. yesterday and woke up at 4 a.m. That's just normal whenever you travel abroad. Back. If I didn't have COVID when I left, I'll have it after standing in line at the customs and passport check. I had my COVID negative pass at Washington Dulles, the world's second worst airport after LAX, and an hour and 10 minutes. And we were fast off. I don't have global entry. I don't go abroad enough for global entry. I should get it just for that one time. But the passport booths, there are like 20 of them. They had 4 people working. And hundreds of people arrived at the same time at Dulles. And we all stood in line milling around for an hour and 10 minutes. And no, I'm not masked. I'm vaccinated and had 2 booster shots. And I didn't have COVID before I went. I didn't have it until I got to Dulles. But it really did indicate to me that the government's no longer concerned. Otherwise, they would just they'd be waving through the Americans. Come on through, come on through. Instead, we just milled around. But I'm back. I'm happy to be back. I am happy to be an American. I'm so glad to live in this country. And even beautiful places like Paris, even moving places like Normandy are great to visit, but there's nothing like the good old USA, and I'm glad to be back in it. Here's the latest news. In Russia, in Ukraine, the Russians are getting chewed up. The United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense has been one of the best sources of news on how it goes in Ukraine. They offered a new sense of the scale of Russian losses yesterday afternoon. It is likely that more than a quarter of Russian battalion tactical groups, these are soldiers of between 700 and 800 number, more than a quarter of them are combat ineffective, I mean they can't fight. So of the 120 such units committed to Ukraine, 30 of them are out of the game. There's also an amazing story on the Russian tank in the Washington Post today. I've tweeted out the link to it, and I would encourage you to go and read this. It's a death trap. The Germans, the Brit, the United States, we build our tanks so that the ammo for the tank turret is stored in the back, so that a hit on the tank is not necessarily a death sentence for everyone in the crew of the tank. The Russians put the ammunition under the crew. So when one of the Stingers or of the other anti-tank man-pads hits the Russian tank, it explodes, it kills everyone. That's why their tank losses are, they just designed them wrong. And you don't have to be an engineer to read this. Just go over to Twitter, take a look at the graphics. I put the link up. Hit it, you'll look at those graphics and you'll say, how do they ever get anyone to agree to be in a tank? When I next talked to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's a tank guy, I got to ask him about that. It's just, did the Russians not learn anything about anything over the last 3 decades? Boy, they're a bad military. Yesterday, finally, some of the civilians in Mariupol's steelworks, the vast steelworks, got out. And that is, it was amazing to watch. If you watched any of the stories yesterday, the children who've been hiding underground for 2 months in the steelworks coming out, they look pretty good. Moms with their 10-year-old. I'm looking at a picture from the Telegraph right now. It's amazing. It's like the Battle of Stalingrad in 2022. And these children lived in the cellars and in the basements of the steelworks. I'm sure they're going to have memories of this all their long lives, but at least they will have long lives. They got out yesterday. The Russians finally eased up and allowed a humanitarian corridor. The EU has stepped up the Russian oil sanctions. They're finally getting into it. Warmer weather has helped. Warmer weather in Europe. And it was beautiful for the 2 weeks that we were there in France. Now, France is not dependent on Russian natural gas the way that Germany is. But in the 2 weeks that Generalissimo and I were there, it didn't rain a drop. It was sunny in the 60s and 70s. It was beautiful. It might have been the only 2 weeks in the history of Europe that they've ever had no rain and just gorgeous conditions. What that means is that the Russians lost a lot of leverage when it comes to energy. The best story of the morning, though, is in the Washington Post as well. Hacking Russia was off limits. The Ukraine war made it a free-for-all. For more than a decade, U.S. cyber warfare security experts have warned that Russian hacking increasingly uses the labor force of financially motivated criminal gangs to achieve political goals. Prolific ransomware, and I've been hit by that many years ago. We've learned how to defend against it, as most people have. The Colonial Pipeline shut down, other attacks. We always thought that they were the big cyber superpower. Turns out they were far more vulnerable than we knew. And it's not the United States government or any other government. It's hackers who hate Russia have gotten together, and they're deeply anonymous, and they know how to do it. They're the kind of people that you can never find, and that hopefully we get them to work for the government and not against us. They have totally shut down Russian banks. They've captured data. They've shut down Russian utilities. They're going to post that data pretty soon. Russia is reeling from cyber. When you become the world's bad guy, the Snidely Whiplash, that will date myself as a boomer, when you become the Snidely Whiplash of the nations, every hacker who wants to be part of the cause, who wants to join the tribe of the White Hats against the Black Hat Russia, they come after you and they coordinate and they share, and boy, have they done a number on Putin. That country is reeling so far backwards. Eventually, well, I don't know if he has a cost-benefit analysis. It's impossible to say if he has a cost-benefit analysis. Last, compliments to the Speaker and to the members of Congress who went with her to Kyiv. We need to do more of that, and I'm glad that she went. I wish some Republicans had gone. The notice went out way too late for the Republicans to join her. I know some Republicans wanted to go, but found out about it with far too little time to go. I understand operational security. The whole Bush in Baghdad trip sort of set the rules for these things, which you have to hold them very, very close. Everything leaks in Capitol Hill. You don't want half dozen of our congressmen shelled by Russians. So I understand what they did, but I might have, if I were the Speaker, have gone to McCarthy, the leader of the Republicans who will be the next Speaker of the House, and said, you want to come to Kyiv, keep this between us. She didn't do that. Beijing has escalated restrictions in response to the rise of COVID in the PRC capital. There's a 5-day holiday that began Saturday, and local officials won't let anyone eat out. It's the annual May Day holiday that communists everywhere celebrates. But they haven't called it an official lockdown, and they don't need a second Shanghai on their hands. We're going to be paying for this for a long, long time. I'll do the market report afterwards. If you own Amazon, you know that Friday it lost 15% of its value. That wiped out like $20 billion of Jeff Bezos' wealth. Don't be alarmed. A lot of this is just supply chain, and the underlying value of companies is the underlying value of companies. You don't buy and sell based upon quarterly results. But the Chinese supply chain generated problems are only going to get worse for people who buy and sell things that depended upon it. Like Apple had a terrible quarter as well. They didn't get slaughtered the same way Amazon did, but they got slaughtered last week because they can't get their stuff. And they can't get their stuff because, if it goes through Shanghai, forget about it. And most of everything goes through Shanghai. In Israel, Bibi Netanyahu has appeared, is beginning to gain ground on his effort to get back into power as the prime minister, as the governing coalition of 8 different parties, which made no sense at the beginning, has begun to fray and fall apart, with 2 members, one kicked out, one not quite kicked out. It's fallen apart. The Taliban's leader made an appearance. He didn't face the camera, and I'm sure the reason he didn't, he's afraid of facial recognition technology, and I'll try and say his name, Hibatullah Akhundzada, told worshippers at the end of Ramadan the Taliban had achieved freedom and security. Right. Meanwhile, in Great Britain, they're asking you not to buy sunflower oil because there are shortages of cooking oil all across the country, and they don't want people to. They don't want to put in rationing of cooking oil. At the same time, they don't want people to have the toilet paper crisis that we had in the United States at the beginning of COVID. COVID cases are in the rise in the United States again, with limited impact. However, those who are dying from it are almost all 75 and older, and it no longer distinguishes between mere vaccination and non-vaccination. It is actually killing as many vaccinated people, because if you haven't got a booster, and I think probably a second booster, that's not in the story, you're not as protected as you need to be. And if you're over 75, you really ought to go get that second booster. When I come back, I'll talk about the Fed. The Fed is preparing a double-barreled tightening. They are preparing to sell off their bonds, raise interest rates, do everything they can, because the inflation forecast is a nightmare. So the President of the United States was laughing off inflation at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday night. I didn't see it live. I was waiting in line to get back into the country. But it has made the rounds on the inner tubes, and we will tell you about it when I return. I'm Hugh Hewitt, back live inside the Beltway. Stay with me. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. Salena Zito writes for the New York Post, the Washington Examiner, quotes the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where she just had a column on Mike Doyle, which I just posted. Good morning, Salena. How are things in Yinzerland?
Good morning, sunshine. It's doing okay. How about you?
Great. I'm back in the country, and I wanted to check in with you about the Ohio Senate GOP primary, which is tomorrow. And Ohio votes tomorrow. How does Salena Zito, who covered it extensively, and I think you probably talked to all five of the Republican candidates who are in the hunt, how does it look to you?
Well, I'll actually be at the MZR tomorrow night covering the results coming in Youngstown, so I'm pretty excited about that. Back in February, I made the assessment that if J.D. Vance continued to do what he was doing, no matter whether Trump endorsed him or not, he to me seemed on the trajectory to win because he was doing the things that voters wanted. He was going into small towns, medium towns, suburbs, rural areas, and just listening to voters and just sort of, just doing those small retail events and knocking on doors, much the same way that Dave McCormick is doing in Pennsylvania, and much the same way that Brian Kemp has done in Georgia. And I think this is a year that matters.
And so I don't know if Pittsburgh, where you live, picks up any of the Ohio media. I'm told that every single ad on every single media market, and there are a few. There's, of course, Cleveland and Cincinnati, but there's also Columbus and Toledo and Dayton and the Youngstown Warren local station, 2233, those sorts of things, 2133, and I can't remember the 27. What is it? Who's winning the air war?
Well, we are getting our own in Pennsylvania. We are getting swamped in our own Senate race. So I haven't seen how the ads have been running. However, I have heard, and I've looked at all their ads. Again, I still go back. My gut says Vance, and this has, by the way, this has nothing to do with Trump. My gut still says Vance has had the most effective way of reaching voters.
Okay, now I want to remind everyone else, Josh Mandel is in the race, Jane Timken is in the race, Mike Gibbons is in the race, Matt Dolan is in the race. The last fellow has been put in the last splurge on. I mean, he's gained the most, but I don't know that if he's gained enough to catch Vance. Do you?
That is absolutely true. He has become the insurgent candidate. Now, had this happened even 2 weeks ago, it could have mattered. However, he's just surged too late, and that's the clock's going to run out on him. That's the challenge for Dolan.
And the clock, of course, strikes midnight at whatever is the time that the voting ends tomorrow in Ohio. I'll be bringing you the results on Wednesday. Everyone's had exactly the same number of minutes on the Hugh Hewitt Show because I don't have a dog in the fight. I've covered it as fairly as I can. I don't know that there is a dominant issue in Ohio other than inflation, and they all kind of agree on that, don't they?
Well, inflation, but also the border. And for not for the reasons that people might think, because they think, Arizona, Texas, California, the things that we see there. No, it's the fentanyl and the meth. It is those deaths, those overdose deaths that are epidemic proportions, especially in the Appalachian portion of Ohio and along the Steel Valley that you and I know so well. And so the border and also crime, I mean, it's all the same issues that are upsetting on a national level are really the same problem on a local level. And the ineffectiveness of Democrats to address those issues. I mean, that is Tim Ryan's sort of big challenge. Tim Ryan 10 years ago, I believe, would have walked away with this race. I don't think so today. That's come November.
That comes November. Now, Jane Timken is the only woman in the race. I've often said the last man standing is usually the only woman in a race with one woman and many
Right.
men. I don't know that that works anymore. I think most people are dialed in. Voters are always smart, but they also aren't gender driven as much as they used to be 20 and 30 years ago. What's your assessment of Jane, who's been out? We got a minute. She's been out on the road with Rob Portman, who endorsed her.
Yeah, I mean, and Rob Portman, as you know, was an amazing campaigner. But this is a very issue-driven campaign. I mean, an issue-driven year. It's also a very inside-outside year. That's her challenge because she's seen as the establishment. So in an inside-outside year, you are going to see someone more like Vance or Dolan have a successful year, as opposed to someone like Timken or Mandel, who tend to be seen as establishment because they've held office.
And Mike Gibbons, of course, also on the outside, very much so. Three outsiders,
Oh, yeah.
two people who've been around for a long time, Mandel and Timken. It'll be fascinating. I mean, it could be close. We'll be studying it for a long time. Salena Zito and I will be telling you about it next week when it's in the books. Ohio votes tomorrow. Pennsylvania votes in 3 weeks. Don't go anywhere, America. Hour number 2. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt back live inside the Beltway after 2 weeks in France, and I'm glad to be home, and I'm glad to be talking to Jake Sherman of punchbowlnews.com. If you do not get your morning email from punchbowlnews.com, you got to sign up for it. It's absolutely free, and it does bring you up to speed every single morning, and I always talk to Jake on Monday. Good morning, Jake. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Hugh. How are you?
Good. You may not believe this, but I did not watch the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I was standing in line at passport control forever at Dulles when that went down. So I don't know if you got hit with any of the shrapnel. I saw some of my friends got scorched by Trevor Noah. How about you?
I did not get scorched. I was not there. I am getting over COVID. But I watched a little bit, but not enough to make an educated assessment of the night.
Well, I'll tell you that I've only gone once. I wasn't invited this year, but I will never go again. I went the Sarah Huckabee year, the low point of the White House Correspondents Association. I said, I'm never doing this again. So I don't bring up the jokes because I think it's not fair to have 6 professional writers have Trevor Noah make fun of you. That's just not fair. Jake, I want to ask you about Punchbowl News this morning. I read it so closely that I actually see when you make a mistake. Today you referred to Matt Dolan as Mike Dolan in the Punchbowl News. Yeah, and so that's how closely I read it for people. I just tell you that you're right. He's the insurgent. He's the guy who's creeping up, Matt Dolan. But J.D. Vance, I did not know that the president mangled his name. The president could guest host for me because I mangle every name. I might call you John Sherman before the end of this. But what do you make of the Ohio Senate race, the Pennsylvania? My rule is if it's a 2-person race, the president makes a difference. See North Carolina. If it's a 3, 4, or 5-person race, not too sure that the former president matters all that much. What say you, Jake Sherman?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think also, on the other hand, I think we're seeing polls, Hugh, and I think we've talked about this once or twice, but we've seen polls that indicate that the president's endorsement is not totally dispositive in these races. I mean, you see that in Pennsylvania, where Mehmet Oz is the leader, but not by a huge margin. I think that's right. I think that generally speaking, Senate races are about who has a connection to the individual and who feels like the individual, whether voters feel like the individual has a certain connection to the state. I think people are questioning that with Oz in Pennsylvania for sure. And in Ohio, I think it's just Mandel's a complicated candidate. He has lost, and he has been a statewide elected official. He has lost once. I just think that he's not completely dispositive. But what you see, and I know you see this, Hugh, because you follow this stuff closely, what Trump does is he also endorses, he talks about his win record, but he then goes and endorses someone like Jackie Walorski in Indiana and Jim Banks in Indiana, who I know you're friendly with, who have no competition. So it pads his win record, which is a nice thing for him.
Well, I go back to Ohio race. I've had each of the candidates on exactly the same number of times. I think I'm in within 2 minutes of each of them in terms of airtime. The last one I interviewed was Matt Dolan last week, and Matt was very, very candid. He said more than a third of Ohio voters refuse to answer the question. They say they're undecided. So It will be. It could surprise everyone tomorrow. It could be Jane Timken, the last woman standing in a race with 5 candidates, only one of whom is a woman. Could be Mike Gibbons, the avuncular VC, who is just so Ohio. He's like everybody I ever met at a boosters meeting for the high school football team. Matt Dolan is a hardworking candidate. I mean, the guy's been everywhere in the state, but so has JD and Josh. It's a fascinating race, Jake. You could write a book on that race.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and then you go to the Democratic side. I don't think that absent Republicans nominating somebody who ends up being a disaster, I think it's going to be really tough for Tim Ryan or whoever comes out of that Democratic primary, just because Ohio is not, it's just not the purple state that it was several years ago, Hugh. I mean, I remember when I started covering Congress, we had Ohio had a delegation that was just not down the middle red and blue, but Eastern Ohio had a bunch of Democrats representing it. And there were just Democrats all over the state. Now there are far fewer Democrats in the Buckeye State.
Yeah, Hugh's rule is never say anything bad about a colleague, a former colleague, or a friend. Tim Ryan is my friend and has been for 25 years. So I'm not going to be talking much about Tim as this race goes forward. But I will talk about Ohio. Ohio's a deep red state. Missouri went deep red first, then Ohio, and now Pennsylvania, Jake Sherman, is going deep red. And it's because of demographic change, and there are factors which no candidate can overcome. When you wrote about the Progressive Congress endorsing in the Democratic primary, that was news to me, because, of course, I don't follow that race all that close. But I was fascinated by your rundown on that. Tell people about that.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting situation. This is the seat that Marcia Fudge, who's now the HUD director, HUD secretary, used to hold in Ohio. And so this is a race between Shontel Brown and Nina Turner. Shontel Brown won this race when Fudge resigned to take a cabinet post. Nina Turner was kind of the darling of the left. She got endorsements from Pramila Jayapal, the chair of the Progressive Caucus. She got endorsements from Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But now Shontel Brown, not Nina Turner, is the member of Congress, and Shontel Brown is somebody who has now gotten the endorsement of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And this has rankled some Democrats because progressives lined up behind Nina Turner last time. Now they're lining up behind Shontel Brown. It's caused some consternation, let's say, to say the least, in that Progressive Caucus, where people believe that the members are joining the Progressive Caucus just to head off primary challenges. Now, the Progressive Caucus is big. It has a lot of sway in the Democratic caucus, which is trending progressive. You have to acknowledge that. And it is something that we are keeping a close eye on, because the story of the progressives on Capitol Hill is the story of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, Hugh, when I started, this ties it back into Ohio, to what we were talking about before. When I started covering Congress 13 years ago, the Democratic caucus, the biggest block, the most significant block was Blue Dogs, was the Zach Spaces and I'm blanking on other names right now, but all those Ohio, Steve Driehaus.
Stupak, Bart Stupak.
Bart Stupak, exactly, yeah. From the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, who were just able to do whatever. They were all Joe Manchin, let's put it that way.
Yes.
They were able to do whatever they wanted with legislation. Now it's the story of the Progressive Caucus. And the Progressive Caucus is what sways everything on Capitol Hill, and it's the story of the Democratic caucus right now.
And what's interesting to me, Jake, on the other side, the Freedom Caucus has shrunk in its influence and numbers as Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise consolidate power over the caucus. I want to ask you briefly about the Ministry of Truth that has been established. I know that DHS rejects that. Secretary Mayorkas did almost the full Ginsburg yesterday, trying to tell everything, nothing to worry about. I can't imagine Democrats in Congress are happy about this. It's just another storyline. When I played Ron DeSantis riffing on it for a full minute, when poor Secretary Mayorkas, I'm even feeling bad for the guy, anticipating his next hearing, and they're going to run through the TikTok videos of what's her name? I don't even know her name. Jankowicz? Yeah, Jankowicz is the new Minister of Truth over at DHS. Why would they? Do you think Ron Klain knew this was coming? It's another rake they didn't have to step on, and they stepped on it.
I don't know if Klain knew. I have no idea about that. I saw that Mayorkas kind of was squirming a little bit on the Sunday shows, had a tough time, not a tough time, but an uncomfortable time with this. I know Dana Bash on State of the Union, and I know that Mayorkas kind of said it was a small group in DHS, and he said we probably could have done a better job communicating what it does and what it does not do. And it's trying to what DHS has said is that it's a necessity in preventing disinformation that is from other nations that is a threat to the homeland. So this appears to be a way to weed out some disinformation, some propaganda from other countries. But listen, I think this ties into the overarching theme of the election, which was the overarching theme of the 2010 election, or one of the overarching themes to this election, which is that the people feel the government has grown too powerful, too big, too bulky, too invasive in other people's lives, and that's a problem.
And it's deeply incompetent. By the way, I volunteered this morning to join this board of disinformation specialists because I've been pointing out disinformation. But when Brett Baer asked the DHS secretary yesterday, it was the Russian dossier disinformation, and he couldn't answer that. Told me everything I need to know about this, Jake. Quickly, I want to wrap up. The president's numbers are so low, they got a little bit of bounce because you can fall off the floor, but I think it's what the proverbial dead cat bounce is. Is there anything he can do other than forgive student loans to bolster his numbers, which is why I think he's going to forgive student loans? 20 seconds, Jake.
Yeah, the economy has to turn around. Inflation has to go down. That's the main gist of it. And a lot of that, some of that's in his control, some of it's out of his control.
And it seems like the cake is baked, as you say in Punchbowl News this morning. 190 days to the vote. Can't turn an economy around in 190 days. Jake Sherman, Punchbowl News. Go subscribe, punchbowlnews.com. Come back right here to the Hugh Hewitt Show.